Welcome to the Mindscaped podcast. Politics, environment, history, mental health, business, religion, people, and philosophy. Escape to the real world.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of Mindscaped podcast, a show where we delve into topics that are really important for community to discuss, especially here in South Africa, but anywhere around the world. And that's what this is all about. So Shaheen, how are you doing?
Good, tired, mentally exhausted.
Why? What have you been doing so much?
The world is going mad.
Yeah.
Right now it's just deteriorating, and especially with the industry that we are in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be a humanitarian catastrophe if this doesn't come to an end soon enough.
Absolutely. So today's topic is on the most pressing issue right now in the entire world. Whether you're Muslim, any religion, any part of the world, everyone's talking about this issue. And because it's of the magnitude that we're facing, you have this deeply rooted Israel and Palestine conflict. Many people call it a war. Some say conflict. We'll ask about what is the actual word we should be using. Definitely genocide. And in today's episode, we're going to be shining a spotlight on this humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the war that's happening right now, the region being this conflict for over 75 years now or so. And especially we want to get into the historical context and then the current, as we said, the past, the present, the future of seeing where are we right now, what's going on now. Is this something like out of a fiction novel or a movie, or is this a real world that we're living in? And so that's why we have a wonderful guest here, and her name is Dr. Lubna Nadvi. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So Doctor is a political scientist and academic based at UKZN. She is the Palestinian Solidarity Forum and community activist, as well as member of the KZN Palestine Solidarity Forum and Active Citizens Movement. But that's just a nutshell, just a covering of who Doctor is. I mean, Lubna is, I know for years, joining her on the marches and the campaigns with my late father as well. And then, at university, while I was there, I think we were in contact a lot. And then I looked through your LinkedIn page and I was just going on and, it just went on and on and on. So the topics and discussions and the research that you've done is really dynamic and, hats out to you. And we really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you very much.
So, Shaheen, I know we had a discussion on what we wanted to ask you, and people have been asking us. So we put a post out, and a lot of people have sent up some of the questions that they have, requested. And I think we got to start off with the issue of what has happened right now before we get into the history. Right now, we know that Hamas had started this, and this is what the world is saying, that it was Hamas who started this entire crisis that we've seen, and with them on the 7th of October it was, that they did the first attack, right? That's what is going on. And then we saw this barrage of bombs that have fallen over Gaza, and then now the ground incursion. So let's start off with the first question that I had was, does Israel have the right to a Jewish state?
Well, I think some context is required because the issue of the Jewish state arises out of this project of Zionism, which, if you go back into the sort of history, you'll find that it's a political movement that was created so that European Jews could basically have a homeland. So it's not really part of Judaism as such. And most Jewish people will say to you that Zionism is not something that is historically Jewish. So the issue of a Jewish state, basically what it means is that it is a state for just one group of people. But at the end of the day, there are historically other people who have lived there. There's the Arab Palestinians, there's the other minority groups that have also been historically part of that region. So you can't actually say that this is a land that can only be for Jewish people, because it has, and the Christians, of course. It's important to mention that there are 3 monotheistic faiths that are in that region. So it is this idea of a state for a group of people who believe that they are somehow chosen, or that they are, chosen by God. But it comes out of, obviously, a political movement, idea that was started by a person called Theodor Herzl. And effectively, Britain, when it actually gained the mandate of Palestine in 1917, then gives this land, which it actually has no kind of ownership over. It had a mandate, but it gives this land to this sort of group of people who wanted for a Jewish state. But actually, at the end of the day, it is a home that is supposed to be there for all of the monotheistic faiths. So unfortunately, it is not a home for Jewish people, and it should never have been articulated in that way. When the United Nations partitioned the land of Palestine into two and gave half to the original, or what you would call the people who were there, the Palestinians, the Arab Palestinians, and then of course the other immigrants that came from Europe after the Second World War. At that time they were European Jews, and then of course they formed the State of Israel. So the problem really starts when, it does start perhaps much earlier, but the problem starts when Israel unilaterally, or the people that call themselves unilaterally, create the state for Jewish people. Right. And that is really it's a long answer. I'm trying to provide some context, but it's not supposed to be only for Jewish people.
So there's a differentiation between Judaism and Zionism. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
One being a political structure, which is Zionism, and an agenda and an entire thesis on it and a structure behind it. And then the other is the religion of Judaism. But how come that we find that Jews and Jews themselves and the Jewish community find this attachment to Zionism?
Well, I think that Zionism has been constructed as a place where, or a sort of school of thought where it talks about a place where Jews can gather, because historically Jewish people have been migrants, if I can use that word. They've been moving around the world. They've never really had a place which was which they might have considered safe, because there's obviously been a lot of prosecution or persecution of Jewish people historically for various reasons. And so when Theodor Herzl introduced this notion that there would be a safe place for Jews, of course that appealed to them because they felt that this is somewhere they could go, the homeland. And of course the concept of Zionism is something that, speaks to this idea that wherever you are in the world, if you are Jewish, or at least your mother is Jewish, then that makes you Jewish. You could have been born in America, you could have been born in China, you could have been born in, any other part of the world. You can actually make Aliyah, which is a kind of pilgrimage or a sort of return to, the historical land of Palestine, which is, of course, now also called Israel. And you can then get citizenship of Israel. Now, that is something that is a construction. It's something that has just been created so that the territory of Israel could then be populated with a whole lot of people from the rest of the world in order to push out the indigenous Palestinian people and to then create a new reality on the ground. Of course, you have a settler population. Yeah. So in terms of explaining Zionism and Judaism, there are two different ideas. And Zionism is kind of it's an alien notion to Judaism, because most people who consider themselves to be authentically Jewish will say that Zionism has got nothing to do with Judaism, and that actually they believe that they're not meant to be living or be sort of on this land until the Messiah comes. So, there's a sort of whole historical biblical prophecy there. So, I'm not a theologian, but, from the perspective of, if you look at political history and then you look at biblical history, there are obviously sort of dynamics that you need to go into to be able to understand that.
Yeah, okay, I just got one more point on that. Well, you mentioned the biblical history and then obviously the history of Judaism. The Jews, and they say that 3,000 years ago, or even more longer than that, it was their land. So that's why they call it this homeland. How do you understand that then?
So it was God that, according to them, God that promised 12 tribes, the land, the Bani Israel.
Right.
That land. So how do we, as Nazi said, understand that they claim that 3,000 years ago it was God who promised them that?
Well, I think that's also a kind of fiction that's been created. The land where Palestine is at the moment, and also, the state of Israel, was originally called Canaan, or my pronunciation is
Canaan
correct,
or something.
Canaan or
Yeah.
Canaan. And the original people were the Canaanites. And so their descendants would be the indigenous people of Palestine, basically, the Arabs of the region. And the patriarch of the sort of monotheistic religion, Abraham, Prophet Abraham, may peace be upon him, he migrated from a further region away from Canaan to the land of Canaan. So technically he was a migrant. And of course, when he then had, his sons, who then, of course, from whom the descendants of the Muslim
Muslims,
and the Jewish communities emerge, they, of course, then, live on the land. But technically, the Canaan community is the original indigenous people. And so if you take a kind of anthropological or, sort of a geographical understanding of it, the sort of head of the patriarch of the Jewish lineage actually migrated to Canaan. So you can't say that he was there from the start.
Right.
Okay, so
If I can explain it in that simple way.
Okay.
So with that being said, is there a possibility, if I have to play devil's advocate, that some of the original people of the original land, Palestine, converted to Judaism, and they are laying claim to the land?
Well, remember that from Abraham, the sort of sons, Isaac and Ismail, and then, of course, the subsequent generations. So those communities, you, of course, have the Muslims that come from Ismail and the Jewish community that comes from Isaac or Isaac. And, of course, those communities, they moved around quite a lot. But, of course, there was always a minority Jewish group that was there in the region. And if you follow the story of Moses or Musa alayhi salam, and of course how he was trying to leave Egypt and come back to that land, and he couldn't. And of course, so throughout history, there's been this process where Jewish people have tried to gather in that land, and there've been minority Jewish groupings that have lived there. And of course, the land has been conquered over many generations by different civilizations and so on. And then, of course, when the Romans conquered it, I mean, this is, sort of several thousand years of history, which is very hard to go into. But when the Romans eventually conquered it, they evicted the Jews from the, land of Jerusalem. I mean, the Jerusalem and the surrounds. And, of course, they then were spread out across the world, went to Europe and other parts of the world. And so ever since, there's been this, desire to go back to what they considered home.
Right.
But in a sense, it's not really something that can be justified, where you come to a region and then you want to throw out the people that have historically descended from the Canaanites, we're the indigenous people, and so. Multiple communities lay claim. The Christians can also lay claim to say that Jesus Christ, Isa alayhi salam, was born here, and so we have a right. Technically, all three religions have the historical presence there. I mean, the churches, the mosques, the synagogues. So all three religions have at some point had a presence there, and they all have a right to be there. And so the land should actually be shared amongst them. And what is happening right now is the Israelis are, carrying out genocide and ethnic cleansing. And they are pushing out the Christians as much as they are pushing out the Muslims. So it's not a case of just, it's a Jewish-Muslim kind of war happening.
So just to go back on to Zionism, can one be a Christian or a Muslim and at the same time claim to be a Zionist? I remember a few years ago watching the ex-Prime Minister of England, Tony Blair, where he claimed, I'm a Christian Zionist. Is that possible?
And a lot of evangelists, I think, also have that.
So again, as I said, I'm not a theologian, but in terms of trying to explain it politically, Christians do believe that they need to, protect Jerusalem so that Jesus Christ can come back to a united Jerusalem. And so the story that Zionism then advances, which is that, we have to protect Jerusalem, and therefore we have to protect Israel, and therefore we have to protect this Jewish state in order for, what has been predicted to come true. So the Christians then buy into this notion of Zionism, and it works in the favor or the interest of the sort of, Zionist
agenda,
the Jewish Zionists. And it's important to say that there are Jewish people who are not Zionists, and I did sort of make that distinction. So Christian Zionism is something that emerges out of, obviously, this political attempt made by the Jewish Zionists to advance their agenda. And, of course, the Bible says certain things, and when you go to, certain congregations, church groups, they push this idea that we have to protect Jerusalem, we have to protect Israel because Jesus is going to return, and so on and so on. And Christians, unfortunately, buy into this without understanding the nuances of what's
100%.
happening and how they're being kind of pushed into doing things. Like, for example, the United States has a very strong Jewish lobby, but more of a Zionist lobby, which funds, Israeli sort of military activity. And it's because the Christian Zionists support this belief that they then push the American kind of Congress and the political system to fund this agenda. So it's all sort of this very, complex thing. But if you break it down, then that's what it sort of boils down to.
I watched a documentary a while back on Al Jazeera, and they were talking about the evangelicals. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right.
Yeah, evangelicals.
In Texas, that's the biggest donors and funders to the settlers in Israel.
Sure.
Not governments, it was the church.
Wow.
Where they showed one church gives close to $180 million every year
That's
to support
correct.
this movement.
Yes, because, the Israeli regime seeks various forms of funding. So it seeks reparations, so-called, from, European sources to pay for the kind of Holocaust that the Jewish people went through in Germany. But they also then seek funding from other kind of sources, Christian sources and so on, in order to keep Israel, because it's a small country. And so, in order to do all the things it does, especially the wars that it
It's
has,
costly.
It's very costly. So it needs to keep the money coming in order to keep all of that happening.
So let's bring it back now to the current situation that we faced and the dire strait that is happening in Gaza right now. As we talk, there's bombs falling. Refugee camps that we've been to and we've visited in Bethlehem, and we've seen the beautiful kids that we play around with, and now it's just being bombarded with this carpet bombing and all the sulfur that they're dropping on. And it was all in terms of them in defense of Israel. And the US says it, the UK says it, many other countries of the Western world would say Israel has a right to defend themselves. And because Hamas was the one that started this. And this is the rhetoric that is being flooded in the mainstream media. And the question we have is, and the question they've been asking to every presenter, the common word, do you condemn Hamas? And some presenters have just said, yes, okay, we condemn it. Now let's move on to the real issue. Others have said, why do you want me to condemn this? You have never condemned Israel for their amount of killing for the last 75 years. How should we answer that? How do you answer that question?
So let's go back a bit in history. In 2006, Hamas, as a political party, won elections. The Palestinian people voted, and they elected Hamas to be their government. This was not acceptable to Israel and to, of course, its sort of funders and patrons like the United States and the UK. So obviously, the sort of Israeli regime has a working relationship with the other political party, Fatah, which then has made up now the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And the Israeli regime preferred to keep the Palestinian Authority as that sort of, government figure.
Mahmoud Abbas. We talk about Mahmoud Abbas.
Yes.
So the PLO and Al Fatah and Fatah the same.
Fatah is a political party which, is one of the many political parties which is part of the broader grouping called the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization.
So again, just how many are others? What can you name?
You can say there's the, PLFP, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine,
Right.
and a couple of others. There's quite a few. Some are more militant and some are sort of just, political parties. So
Right.
effectively, Hamas was considered as the democratically elected government of the Palestinian people. And because there were a whole range of, parties that didn't like it, over a period of time, Hamas was constantly, kind of pushed to the side and they were not really recognized as the government. And
But that's also been pushed to the side within the Palestinian territories with other organizations.
well, I would say in Gaza that they are considered, the government. And if you speak to many other Palestinians, they would also say that they do consider Hamas as a, democratically elected government. So over a period of time, people's opinions change and so on. So, it's not for me to speak on behalf of the Palestinians. You'd have to get Palestinians into your studio and to ask them what they actually think. But just in terms of us as solidarity activists engaging with Palestinians on the ground, both in Gaza, in the West Bank, and also in the broader global diaspora, there's a sort of recognition that Hamas has a significant role to play. It was the democratically elected government, even though it was not recognized. So over a period of time, Fatah then kind of became installed as the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and they, so Hamas carried out, so between 2006 and, now 2023, Hamas has had this kind of presence in Gaza as a kind of political authority as well as, let's call it, it has a militant sort of side, which is the Qassam brigades, and they carry out all of the militant activity. If I can use...
So would you say like the ANC having the MK?
Yes,
like that
exactly.
kind of relationship? Okay.
Yeah,
so they had their own agreements and own way that they would deal, but they were still sister organizations. Could you say that?
Yes, absolutely. The Qassam brigades carry out all of the kind of militant activities that, the Hamas would approve. So on the 7th of October, Qassam brigades carried out a militant, activity.
Yeah.
They sort of, found their way into Israel, and of course we all know the details of how they flew in as paragliders, and then they bulldozed a section of the wall to basically break through and get into Israel proper. And so the question of condemning Hamas is one that is complicated, because here is a military sort of or militant kind of grouping that is effectively engaging in an act of resistance, because from 2006 they have basically been subjected to a siege.
Yeah.
The Israeli regime has basically kept the people of Gaza oppressed and under siege, and
They call it the largest open air prison.
absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
So for more than 15 years, you have a community that is living like this, and is forced to survive in this environment. And who is going to live like that forever? No one is going to live like that forever. So
And accepted, right?
And accepted. Yeah. So effectively, if you look at it from the perspective of an oppressed community, they're going to, if you keep your knee on someone's neck for a very long time, and they basically stop breathing, or they're beginning to lose their ability to breathe, what are they going to do? They're going to push your knee off their neck, right? If I can use that example.
Yeah.
So that's what the Qassam brigades did on the 7th of October. They had the Israeli knee on their neck, choking them to death. And I'm speaking about the collective population of Gaza. And Gaza couldn't breathe because, supplies were being restricted. They couldn't sort of develop as a community. The food that was being allowed in was only sort of as much as Israel would allow
Yeah.
so that they didn't starve completely and so on. So at the end of the day, I think it's important to have context for why what happened on the 7th of October happened. These people were being starved to death slowly, and so they effectively, carried out this activity. Now, to sort of give it further context, if Israel says Hamas started it, no, Hamas did not start it. Hamas basically, and their militant wing, Qassam brigades, carried out, as I said, a military operation, let's call it that, in order to let the world know that we are dying, we are being choked to death, and we refuse to be choked to death. And so this is where, we have to actually understand that operation in that context. Now, of course, Israel's response has been basically to bomb the entire region almost into oblivion.
But that's the question. Did not Hamas know that the impact of their actions by not securing their own people, right? Not having enough security for their own people, knowing that they were going to go into this, and then the reaction is going to be extreme.
Collective punishment.
This whole collective punishment. Did they not know that? Did they not expect that? And then at the risk of their own community lives, yet they're the government?
Well, absolutely, they knew that. I mean, they are well aware of what the capacity of the Israeli regime is. So it's not as if they didn't know that, but they could have just kept quiet, and everyone could have slowly just died, with this sort of siege continuing.
While the normalization with Israel continues.
Well, that's it. All this sort of Abrahamic Accord stuff and all of that happening, and Saudi Arabia was, very close to signing on a kind of normalization agreement with Israel, and so on and so on. So it was, I suppose, a gamble that Hamas took together with its militant wing. But if you look at throughout the history of, the sort of Palestinian, if I can call it, question, or the Palestinian sort of struggle for determination, you've had people who have engaged in activities that, many others would consider terrorist, but they, from the perspective of those people who carried it out, those activities were seen as, we are crying out, we are trying to be heard. For example, Layla Khaled, who is well known for having been one of a group of plane hijackers who, if I can use the word hijack, because that's the term that's everyone uses, but basically they overpowered the pilot of this plane, and they told the pilot to fly the plane over Palestine. They couldn't actually land there. But the point is that these are people who are crying out to be heard, to be recognized, because their rights are being denied to them. So at the end of the day, if militant ways are the only thing that is available to them to survive and to live, that is what they're going to do. So if, for example, you ask me, if someone is trying to, as I said, I use the example of someone trying to choke you to death, what am I going to do? Just quietly lie down and die?
Yeah.
No, of course not. You're going to fight back. So what Hamas did on 7th of October is fought back, knowing that this would be the reaction. It is very unfortunate that what is happening. And I'm not justifying, because it's not for me to, judge or justify or anything of the sort. But if you ask for an explanation from a kind of political perspective, they probably took a gamble to say, we need to do this. We need to let the world know that we are dying. And this is perhaps the only way that we can do it. And what has been the outcome of that? It's unprecedented to have, for example, Jewish Americans take over the Congress building and do a sit-in.
Yeah.
And basically will be willing to be arrested for their actions. And again, they occupied the sort of central station in New York.
Yeah.
And those are unprecedented things. So the actions that were taken by, the Al-Qassam brigades and Hamas has led to an awakening in the international community, an opening of eyes, perhaps people who were totally blind and couldn't see what was happening.
Yeah.
That has been the consequence. Unfortunately,
At the expense.
8,000 plus
So
civilians have lost their lives.
just to go back to what you said about Israelis suffocating the people of Gaza, what role would you say does Egypt play into this? Because the Rafah border goes into Egypt, and to my knowledge, there's no Israeli troops at that border. So would it be fair to say Egypt is as complicit as Israel in the suffocating of Palestinians, especially Gazans?
Absolutely, because that is the one gate that exists for the Gazans to exit to a safe place. So, for example, if there's bombing happening in the Gaza Strip, it's a very small area. Humanitarian sort of, logic would say to you, open, an exit way or a sort of gate to allow civilians to exit. Unfortunately, Egypt takes instruction from Israel. So, yes, it is very complicit in what has been happening. And, if, for example, Egypt wanted to, and of course the government that's in place at the moment is very pro-Israel, but if Egypt wanted to, as a government, it could very easily, allow the passage and provide opportunities for the Gazans or Palestinians in Gaza to travel, to be able to exit safely, to actually also now, that they're going through what they're going through, send in aid and actually refuse to listen to the Israeli government. But unfortunately, the Israeli government also controls that border, even though in terms of sovereignty, it's Egyptian territory.
Because I didn't know that. I thought there was an Israeli border there.
No.
So straight from Gaza is Egypt.
Yeah, so that border was, I think it was been shut for the last 16 years, if I'm not mistaken. And they only allow, at certain times, they open it up. And they only allow a certain amount of trucks to go in each day. It's not open like other borders.
So I honestly thought that Israel had some level of control, and there was like how we've crossed in from Jordan, and there was this no man's land. I thought there was this no man's land
Egypt
kind of story.
does, have some degree of say in terms of what moves in and out. But in terms of the geographical location, I mean, you have Egypt on the one side, and you have Gaza, and there's a gate. So in terms of the kind of sovereign space, it would be Egyptian sovereign space, if I can explain it in that way.
Sure. So it was that easy for them to open it.
Now this is why I always have.
But they fear that.
Yeah, I always have this debate with a lot of people that, as much as we blame Israel for everything they're doing, you need to blame everyone else that's helping them as well. So
Absolutely.
So as much as we blame the US,
Yeah.
the US isn't there. Egypt is there.
Yeah.
So why do we not focus on the Egyptian government?
Exactly. Yeah.
And my argument, sorry to cut you off. I always tell people it's much easier for us to boycott and debate issues where a non-Muslim seems to attack a Muslim, but where a Muslim attacks a Muslim, we seem to keep completely quiet about it.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it. It's like a taboo.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, the problem is that the Palestinians have been let down by their own brethren, the Arabs, Arab countries around them. Of course, they've been let down by many other sort of, parts of the world, other governments, other countries. If you go back to, just over a decade, you had the Arab Spring that took place, and Egypt was one of the countries where their very sort of long-serving president, Mubarak, was removed from office. And then replaced by Mohamed Morsi. And Mohamed Morsi was considered a kind of popular figure. And when he came in, he refused to take instruction from the Israelis. He was actually helping the Palestinians. He was trying to ensure that Rafah border could be more useful and accessible to the Gazans and so on. But of course, the Israelis wouldn't have that, and the Americans wouldn't have that. So what did they do? They arrested him on trumped-up charges.
Yeah.
They
Ousted him.
Yeah, and they created a situation where one day there's no sort of fuel and a whole range of other things have just stopped functioning. And of course, the people rise up against Mohamed Morsi. He gets arrested. And then not too long after that, the fuel and everything else seems to magically reappear. So, of course, this is a fabricated situation that happens. And every time you have a leader that does not meet the sort of
criteria
approval or the criteria of the
allegiance.
Exactly, the regimes that are trying to control the area, whether it's Israel, America, UK, whatever the case may be, they get removed.
Yeah.
And they get brutally removed, actually, very often. I know we're speaking about Israel and Palestine, but if you look at other parts of the world where this kind of regime change has happened, I mean, Pakistan is another victim of that with the removal of Imran Khan. And because he spoke about Palestine on the world stage, he's also been removed. So that's the link here. So you'll find that this is unfortunately the reality that is there. So
and the weakness of the rest of the world, the Ummah itself.
I would blame the international community for what is happening in Gaza. If they didn't allow this to happen, it wouldn't happen. It's a simple case of basically saying to the Israelis, and the UN has almost 200 countries, and they all have militaries, and it's a case of saying to Israel, we refuse to allow this to continue. But because for 75 years the United Nations has let them get away with it, America constantly vetoes every Security Council resolution against Israel. So Israel gets protected. And so the murder and death of the civilians in Gaza is really at the hands of the entire international community. Even though the most recent vote that happened in the sort of General Assembly, you had about 120 members saying they support the kind of ceasefire and a humanitarian kind of mission now to come in, and 12 people, 14 or something were against, and 45 abstained. All of that. I mean, these are games that the international community is playing with these people's lives. The United Nations could very easily just send in, military kind of mission, and stop it. In the past they've done that for African conflict situations and so on. So I think that the international community really has the blood of the Palestinians on their hand.
Do you think one of the reasons why the Arab nations aren't getting involved in Gaza specifically is because Hamas is the birth child of the Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood?
As I said, I think that it's a complicated political debate within the Arab community, because some countries are pro-Ikhwan and others are not. And so whether Hamas emerges from the sort of brotherhood kind of overarching body or from some other body, at the end of the day, it was created so that effectively there would be a voice within that community to be able to counter the nationalist aspirations that the Palestinians had. Ultimately, I mean, there's so many myths and stories and what have you going around that actually Hamas is the creation of Israel, because Israel was trying to stop any, aspirations of the Palestinians to have a national kind of homeland of some kind. And so there is, to some degree, I suppose, some truth to the fact that, they potentially maybe saw Hamas as that kind of counter force to that. But ultimately, Hamas is made up of, it's a Palestinian, kind of entity. And its real kind of goal is to serve the Palestinian people. And whatever you might think of the group, what it has done in recent times, it has been the one group that has actually stood up to the Israelis militarily. Whereas if you look at another Palestinian authority or Palestinian group, like, what exists in the West Bank, Fatah, they have actually collaborated with the Israeli authority to manage the security arrangements on the ground in the West Bank. So
I actually watched something on BBC a couple of days ago where the Israeli government official actually said, Mahmoud Abbas is only alive because we protect him.
Wow.
Other than that, he would be dead.
yes, because if you speak to the majority of Palestinians, they don't really have respect for the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah.
The reason is because the Palestinian Authority receives its grants and salary and so on from, of course, Israeli-approved sources.
Yeah.
And it is able to exist and function and so on because, Israel needs a kind of presence on the ground to manage the natives, if I can use that sort of, way of describing it. And
But something that they control.
And they have outsourced the movement of the Palestinians in the West Bank to Fatah because, they have, quite a large military sort of setup, but they can't really manage this entire population in the West Bank. And sort of course, they have their checkpoints and they have all of the sort of other ways in which they control the movement of the Palestinians in the West Bank. But at the end of the day, it serves their purpose to have, the Palestinian Authority actually controlling them using their own local sort of police force or whatever it may be. So if I have to say who is more legitimate, authentic, and more sort of popular for the Palestinian masses or the majority of the Palestinians, it would be Hamas, because Hamas is actually resisting against,
oppression.
the oppression and occupation.
And they democratically elected.
Yes,
Exactly.
and while the PA is collaborating with the occupiers of the Palestinian people.
And that's why the West used them as the scapegoat and called them a terrorist organization.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, they're actually a resistance group.
Yeah.
And, of course, there's a saying that goes that one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
100%.
So I think most people would say that Hamas and its Qassam brigades are actually the freedom fighters of the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, their actions have resulted in this massive loss of life, and that's very unfortunate. But at the end of the day, if you look at what they were facing and what they actually had to sort of resort to in order to, be heard, this is, unprecedented. It is something that is incredibly just, on a scale that you cannot imagine. So they had to do something really kind of quite drastic, yes. And where we are right now is leading to the loss of life, large loss of life. But what else could they have done? Should they have waited another 75 years? By that time, the 2.2 million people of Gaza would, of course, their children would have basically not have had any future because the Gaza Strip was basically, kind of almost caving in on itself. There was no development, no jobs, no future. What were they to do? Yeah. So they took this drastic step. And again, I think you would have to have someone from Hamas sitting here.
Yeah, to answer for that.
Saying what they have to say. But I'm trying to analyze it from the perspective of, if you look at a people and what they're going through, and if you have to kind of understand it, then that's the way that you would kind of, articulate it.
Yeah. We spoke about the failures of the Arab and the Muslim world right now, And we have to also talk about, I mean, we look at the whole normalization thing, and then you look at Erdogan himself, who I always, saw as one of the great leaders that we should be looking to, and then see him start talking to Israel about, we want this pipeline to actually come through our land. And then when it happened, he just gave this very all lives matter kind of speech. And then as he saw popularity was kind of dwindling for him, he started changing it now, calling Netanyahu a terrorist. So we're seeing, and this is entire thing, as you said earlier, is exposing the truth of so much to many people, to either side, even to us, right? Exposing the leaders that we would think would be on the right side. But at the same time, we have to look at the success, right? And the success comes into who is able to stand up and who is standing up for the who is standing up for the Palestinians right now, from a military perspective, from a humanitarian perspective. Which countries are they, especially the Muslim countries? We've seen Qatar, right? So Qatar has provided aid many times. You spoke about this the last time, right?
Yeah, Qatar provides, I think, pays all the government workers' salaries.
Right.
That comes from Qatar.
From the government themselves.
Yeah, but again, if you unlayer this, Qatar is very pro-Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
So if you look at the Arab countries, who support them and who really don't, and if you unlayer that, Qatar is pro-MB.
Right.
Turkey, pro-MB.
Yeah.
UAE, Saudi hate MB because MB, basically, Muslim Brotherhood, threatens to overthrow their thrones.
Bring back the Khilafah. And then you look at Iran, right? You look at them and you see now, Yemen and the Houthi rebels that have come. They're the ones, right, Shane?
You're forgetting about Hezbollah.
Hezbollah. They're the ones who are protecting. Those are the ones who are standing up. Those are not just talking. They're doing. And what do you think about that?
Well, at the end of the day, the Yemeni people have really suffered extremely, given the sort of attacks that they have been going through from the Saudi regime and so on. And so I think it's very admirable that the Yemeni people, the sort of Houthis and whoever else is sort of engaged in the kind of support that they're providing to the Palestinians. I mean, with the very little that they have and the sort of their own challenges that they're going through, they're actually providing military support to an embattled and a sort of really oppressed people. So, and then of course, whatever other support. I mean, Hezbollah is of course an entity that was created to defend Lebanon from Israeli occupation, and of course Israel followed the sort of the Palestinian liberation movement in exile, because the Palestinians needed a place to be able to operate or function. And so, of course, they went into Lebanon, and then the Israelis followed them, and they went and occupied Lebanon. So Hezbollah said, we don't want the Israelis in our territory, and they then, formed to be able to expel them. And they then have become now a presence to, of course, support the Palestinians. So it's interesting how this all is playing itself out. Like in terms of, you would have thought that the larger military countries like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE potentially would be the countries that Jordan even, although Jordan has agreements with Israel and so on and so on.
And they're the custodians of the Al-Aqsa
That's right.
compound,
that they would actually have been the ones that would have militarily supported Palestine to protect it.
Yeah.
But they haven't. It's been like these smaller entities. Hezbollah is not a government. It is a militant structure that exists within broader Lebanon. The sort of Yemeni sort of countries is very small, I mean, compared to the other Muslim countries around it. But it is actually supporting them.
But it's not Yemen as a country.
It's not the government of
It's
Yemen.
not the government,
Yes,
no.
yeah.
Because the government, I think, is the country is fractured. So it's broken up into two
Yes.
governments with the Houthi rule and the previous the previous rule. But what's interesting about this with the Houthis and the guys from Lebanon, Hezbollah, both parties are backed by Iran.
Yeah.
So would it be fair to say that if Iran was not around, if Iran was the friend of Israel, we would not have had Hezbollah and the Houthis threatening or attacking Israel?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Iran and Saudi Arabia have historically had this sort of rivalry between them. And it was only more recently that through the efforts of certain countries that they're kind of have some kind of diplomatic now, relationship. But Iran plays an interesting role in that, it's seen as a country that is sort of, if you go into the sort of Islamic history of the Shiite and the Sunni kind of issue that exists, that the Iranians are considered Shiite and therefore they are not, Arab or Muslim in the sort of traditional sense. But of course, that is just a view. What they are actually doing is by supporting Hezbollah, which is then supporting Palestine, they're actually supporting the Palestinians, so they're effectively doing the thing that the Arab countries
And the
should be
Sunni,
doing.
Arab and the Sunnis, right?
Yeah, the Arab and the Sunni. And it's unfortunate that these divisions exist. This Sunni Shia thing, the sort of Arab Persian thing that seems to, emerge all the time. It's why does that even exist? It shouldn't, because the Muslim world is supposed to be a united ummah.
Yeah.
And it should actually be supporting its own, whenever there's some sort of, kind of threat from the outside. But that's unfortunately not been the case because of geopolitical realities and so on. So,
Do you think this could be the unity factor that we need so much in the Ummah?
Unity with who?
With each other. The Shia, the Sunnis, whatever other small sects that are existing in the world right now.
I don't see that happening.
You don't see it happening? It's the one thing that can unite us, though.
well, the thing is that,
Despite the differences, I'm saying.
yeah,
It could be the one that says, look, we all got this. We all have the same fikr, in the word, the same yearning to protect Al-Aqsa and Gaza and this entire Sham region that is constantly being bombed by various entities. It could be. I'm always an optimist, right? So I'm trying to say, could it be?
The way I see this right now, and it's very scary because if Hezbollah, bear this in mind, Hezbollah is not at a full-scale war at the moment.
Right, yeah.
It's more skirmishes. And right now, both sides are hitting targets that are really irrelevant, right? Yemen is quite far away, so they need to fire rockets like almost every day for them to impact,
Right.
to have any sort of impact. What's also interesting is that in the last couple of days, a couple of weeks, Israel has been bombing Syria. No one talks about that,
Yeah.
right? So there's a possibility.
And what's the reason for that?
Iranian installations.
Okay.
According to the right now, I don't think anyone can fly into Syria. They bombed both the airports, so there's no runways.
But the area that they're bombing is Damascus.
Damascus and Halab.
So controlled by Bashar.
Right now, Bashar controls 95% of the country, if I'm not mistaken. But he basically won the war.
Right.
And right now, just as a side note, I think he's been accepted back, or he is going to be accepted back into the Arab League.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's completely changed to what it was 10 years ago.
Oh.
And right now, if this goes into a full-scale war, potentially, you're going to have Hezbollah fighting on the south, which is, I think, the north of Israel. You potentially have the Houthis fighting rockets. You then potentially have Syria coming into the Golan Heights.
I think that, Syria we haven't really looked at in any detail, but Syria is sort of Iran kind of aligned.
Yeah.
And so Iran really is the sort of, let's call it the overarching, factor that is providing the support to the sort of Lebanese, Hezbollah factor, the Yemeni Houthi factor, and the Syrian, regime, or even some of the other sort of parties that would want to be kind of pro-Palestinian. So, I think there's still huge criticism of Assad for the way that he's, behaved and the way that he's treated his people.
Yeah.
I think Syrians in general, still have serious issues with what happened over the Syrian war. But we are now, if we're focusing on what's happening on the Palestinian issue, militarily, those are the sort of countries and the entities that have come in to support Palestine. Yeah. And if you look at the sort of the coast around the region, you find that all of these various ships and massive kind of grouping of these sort of what you would call them kind of gun ships and so on that have
naval bases,
that have kind of accumulated because they're all trying to protect their particular interests. So say Israel is bombed in some serious way by Lebanon or Iran, then these sort of ships on the coast would then, of course, counter that
which they have already. I think there was one of the US, right? Ships had counteracted some bombs that came down.
The first missiles that were shot from Yemen.
Yeah, so this is what's happening.
American taxpayers' money.
Yeah. So the region is kind of getting, really geared up for an all-out war that, unfortunately may break out. Yeah. And at the moment, it's somewhat contained, but I think that it can very quickly really explode and get out of control.
World War III?
Possibly.
It's possible because you have to bear in mind, Iran backs Syria, Russia backs Syria. I think Russia has the only military, its only military base is in Syria, in the entire Middle East, if I'm not mistaken, and they're not going to let that go. The US has in all the other countries.
So there's a domino effect.
Yeah.
If you join, Russia join, China join.
This potentially could.
And then BRICS, South Africa was like, we'll be there.
They're toy.
Well, Russia is a very, although it's fighting this war in Ukraine, it said clearly that it is in support of Palestine.
Yes.
So they're also a possible ally of the Palestinians.
China.
Okay, exactly what you said.
China removed. I think in Alibaba, they removed the map of Israel and called it Palestine.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, the Chinese government did that.
So look, we've discussed the dynamics and we can go into the numbers of how many lives we've lost, and each life to me is precious. It's absolutely precious. A child, a mother, it's generations of families we've seen have been just taken away, and those images are just playing in my mind. My wife and I, every night, unfortunately now we're going on our phone normally, that's what's popping up on our feed, and that guilt hits us really hard and we cry, and then I try to wake up with the Tahajjud and try to read Fajr with Jamaat and the du'as and whatever we're trying, and we're still feeling hopeless. And then you hear a rally that's there, and you hear a march that's out there, and then you join them, and then some people tell you, it has no value, and stay in your home rather, make dua, pray, salah, and that'll definitely be the one. But then we talk about the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ taught us about, you see in evil, you stop it with your hand, and if you can't, then with your mouth, and if you can't do that, then with your heart, and that's the weakest form of iman, and that's the weakest form of faith. And then we say, okay, let's do something, and we join these marches, and then we also do the boycotting. Is there value in these? What has been the successes and the value of this?
How effective is it?
Yeah.
And it doesn't really work. And then in the South African context, the knock-on effect, especially if you have a Muslim workforce, because a few years ago there was an alim who gave a talk, and he said, boycotting in the Western Cape, for example, where you have a majority workforce of Muslims, where thereby the effect of that boycott would basically get those Muslims fired if they're retrenching, then are we prepared to go and give them our salaries or equivalent to what they were earning?
Or give them jobs,
Or give them jobs, because it's very easy for us to say, yes, boycott, but for those that are actually there earning a living and supporting their families, what happens to them in that case?
Well, let's talk about the issue of protests and, demonstrations in general. Historically, when governments do something wrong, the only form of sort of, voice that they have is really to protest and to engage in demonstrations, sit-ins, whatever, is available to them. So that's the way they...
Would that be called civil disobedience?
Civil disobedience and so on. We know this in our own history of the anti-apartheid movement, people marched, and the marching and all of that combined actually made a difference. It brought down apartheid formally. So it does have an impact. And, I spoke about this thing of the sort of American Jews that had gathered and congregated in the Congress building, which is the sort of, the heart of American politics. And they took over the building. And it was powerful if you look at that image. And they were arrested. They have been doing these gatherings for quite some time. And if you go onto social media, you'll find increasingly people who are Jewish, of whatever nationality, are recording videos and saying, I'm a Jewish person and I'm against what Israel is doing, and very critical of Israel. So you're finding that the voices are getting louder and louder, and whether it's individual people who are making these videos or it's like thousands gathering together on the streets. I mean, there was a protest of 500,000 in London recently, almost a million. Almost a million in Turkey. So people coming together and raising their voice. They're saying to their governments, no, we do not agree with what you're doing. Or if they're speaking to the governments of other countries, they're just objecting to it. So yes, it does have an impact. But unfortunately, it hasn't stopped the bombs from falling. So that's the other issue that we have to look at. So that brings us to the issue of tactic. What tactic do you use? And boycotting and divestment and sanctions is really the more effective, because citizens have economic power. I mean, you withhold economic power, that actually enables the wars and the funding of occupations and so on, then that does, make a difference. So we've been saying for a very long time, and the Palestinian community has said the one way that you can actually help us is through boycotting anything that supports the Israeli occupation. And of course, the research has been done, so there'll be sort of a lot of products out there that will tell you about how they're linked to Israel and how the money gets to Israel and so on. So in South Africa, for example, we have various sort of ways in which the boycott can happen. And some time ago, we did this Woolworths boycott, which, taught us many things about how to actually target sort of particular products. I mean, it's very difficult to boycott an entire store or an entire, franchise of stores or what have you, because this is where we buy our food and our basic essentials and so on. But you can go into a store and you can get the products that are from Israel out. You can say to the manager that you will ensure that nobody buys from that store if those products are not removed. And once the products are removed, then basically Woolworths is a South African entity with South African staff. So you don't want to harm the people who are local and that, earn their living through the local, sources. So that's important. Then you have companies that actually are fully sort of supportive of Israel and are international, right? So you'll have, for example, your Starbucks, your McDonald's and so on. So they are international sort of franchises but have South African branches. And there are countries in the world where their local Starbucks have just completely stopped functioning because no one's going to buy. So that's powerful. Yeah. Now we have a Starbucks in Durban, because that's where we're based at the moment. There's in Gateway and there's wherever else. If people just stop going to buy coffee from there and maybe support other local coffee places, then you've made a very powerful statement, and the money that would have gone to Israel doesn't. Then there's also other sort of local brands, right? For example, there's Cape Union Mart, which people have spoken about. It's owned by the Kravitz family, and Philip Kravitz is its sort of CEO. And he has recently made a video expressing his support for Israel after Israel's bombing of Gaza. And of course, historically, we've known about Cape Union Mart. It sells the K-Way jackets and so on. So we have, as Palestine Solidarity activists, said that we must boycott Cape Union Mart and all of its associate sort of brands. Now, there's some confusion about which brands those are, so we'll clarify that and we'll put the information out there. But Cape Union Mart, we've said, is a legitimate target for boycott because the owner, Philip Kravitz was given an award from Israel for the money that he donated towards Israel, and he's constantly now been expressing support for Israel.
Although he clarified saying, Cape Union Mart has never given money, but he has.
He has, and as the owner, his sort of money is coming. Where is he getting his money from? It would be from his businesses, right? So in that way, you basically.
But then, with that being said, would we be creating? It's a hypothetical question. Zulum on those that are actually working there, because there's a possibility of they getting laid off, unemployed. We've got to think about families, loans, school. The knock-on effect, as much as we're trying to protect our Palestinian brothers, but what about protecting our local brothers? How do we overcome that?
So it's a complicated scenario, and I think that the workers themselves have to sort of perhaps engage with their bosses to say, look, our livelihoods are. I mean, it's never an easy and clean kind of situation when it comes to these kinds of things, and boycotts are never something that is comfortable to do and pretty or whatever. So it's complex, but we want to send a message to the owner of Cape Union Mart that it's unacceptable. Yeah. And if his workforce is being affected, then they're going to mobilize and they're going to get involved.
Challenge their management.
Yeah. And they're going to say this is unacceptable. Similarly, there's another brand, Clover, which is a South African brand, but it was bought, controlling stake was bought by Milko, which is an Israeli company. So we've been saying to people, boycott Clover as well, because, that source of income, if people don't buy Clover, it won't go to Israel.
Yeah. And as an environmentalist with Clover, they've changed their white bottle into the color bottles, and that is much more difficult to recycle than the white bottles. Yes. So there's a less amount of recycling done because of that.
What color did they change?
Pink and blue.
Yeah. So this is the other thing about you. You have to actually do your research when it comes to boycotting, and you have to. Some people say, "Well, just tell me what to boycott, and I'll."
Like a blanket thing.
Yeah.
Just like okay, but you can't survive, right?
You have to actually be a bit more involved and engaged, and I think as consumers, as citizens, we actually need to take a bit more responsibility in terms of how we do this. So if you ask the general question of do boycotts and protests and all make a difference? Yes, of course they do, because in the South African case we saw that we didn't go through what the Palestinians went through for 75 years. I mean, our period of oppression has been less, but the international sanctions and boycotts did make a difference. And so we're now in a process where we actually have to do this for the Palestinians, because the international community did that for us. And so as we as South Africans have a responsibility, and also because what's happening in Israel has been described as apartheid. And so we understand apartheid. We know what that's like. And so we have a special, responsibility and obligation to make sure that we do, participate in all of these ways to show support for the Palestinians. But also simple things, like, for example, if you're getting together for a meal with family and friends, right? You can turn that into a Palestine solidarity gathering. And you can, perhaps have food that is from, Palestine, or you can sort of take a picture of your gathering and put it up on social media and say, gathering for Palestine or meet for Palestine. And the, collective effect of that, because when you look at how social media operates, right, it's sort of hashtag, a trending kind of thing. Yeah. And if you have millions of people who put the stuff online and meet for Palestine, whatever hashtag you want to use, there is a war that's happening in the social media space. It's not just on the streets or in the stores or wherever. Yeah. So I think online spaces have to be used more effectively. Also because...
Even though they belong to Zionist supporters.
Unfortunately, what's happening is that we have to use those places to also, make our voice known, because companies like Meta and so on, unfortunately, are using very underhanded ways to shout or to shut down the Palestinian voices. They're shadow banning, and they're doing all kinds of things like that. So it's very important that millions and millions of pro-Palestinian people are going into that space, and they're exposing those companies for doing what they're doing and embarrassing them. I mean, ideally, what would be wonderful is if we had an alternate space to
Twitter.
Alternate sort of.
He's X, yeah. He's made it a free for all platform.
Well, yeah, I mean, a space where we could, as citizens of the world, gather and express ourselves and not be kind of shouted down or shut down.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not the case, but I always believe in the power of the citizen and the people.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, the Palestinians will have their freedom. It's what we do now that will actually make the difference. And we can't stop doing what we're doing. We actually have to, in fact, intensify it. And of course, there's all of these really awful videos that are coming out of Gaza.
Yeah.
I personally have chosen to not view them because they traumatize me.
Yeah.
But I do keep myself informed of what is going on to the extent that I can manage it. So everyone has to sort of manage it as, they can.
Yeah.
But I haven't stopped being an activist.
Yeah.
I continue doing the work on the ground. And it's because of what is happening to the people in Palestine that we actually have to continue with what, we're doing in the ways that we're doing it. And I am absolutely certain that the occupation will end, inshallah, and that Israel will be held accountable.
Do you see a time frame to this?
It's very hard to predict.
In our lifetime?
I would like to think in our lifetime.
Inshallah.
Because if you look at the history of oppression and, civilizations that have fallen because they were oppressive, all civilizations that have oppressed others have fallen.
Yes.
It's only a matter of time.
So right now we're going to talk about our home. Everyone, South Africans themselves many have joined in against the struggle. We have political parties though who have shown their support for Israel, which is extremely upsetting, horrific to hear that. And yet people still continue to vote them. And the question that many people say, well, right now I'm worried about feeding my family, and I've got my own issues, and electricity issues we've got here. So if that party does what they want to do outside of foreign affairs, but they're actually good here with me, I'm going to vote for them, right? And then I look at the current government and their responsibilities that they have. So let's focus on both of those. Being South Africa has not yet officially closed the embassy or expelled the Israeli embassy from here. I don't know about our own representative in Israel, what has happened there. And yet trade continues to be allowed into South Africa. What should we be saying? I haven't seen much of the protest doing that, saying to our government, hey, what's going on? Because I know recently one of the governments did it now in Africa. If I'm not mistaken, they've
South
agreed.
America.
South America it was. Yeah. So let's talk about that for South Africa.
So you've had a lot of marches, and most of the marches have had a very sort of, obvious demand: shut down the Israeli embassy here in South Africa. And so the way in which the sort of government works is that, the ANC has very clearly taken a pro-Palestinian position. It has said we must boycott Israel as a political party. It has expressed support for the closure of the embassy, but the ANC is not the government. The ANC is the ruling party in government. And government obviously has other components to it. Right. So technically, you would have to have some kind of, broader consensus by government to shut down the embassy. But as the ruling party, technically, they could.
They have the power to.
They have the power because they have the majority. Yeah. And there's really nothing stopping the president and the Minister of International Relations from calling in the Israeli ambassador and saying, listen, we do not recognize your credentials.
Ambagashle.
Ambagashle. Futsak is the
Yeah.
more appropriate word for us as South Africans.
I would have
And-
said something else.
It's a family show, right?
No,
So-
no, it's
No, it's
open.
not.
Actually, not uncensored.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's very disappointing that the South African government hasn't actually done that,
Yeah.
because if we had sort of not had this done for us by the international community, which actually did, go to an enormous extent to sanction and boycott apartheid South Africa, we would not be where we are. So we, as the current South African government, are abdicating our responsibility, or the South African government is abdicating its responsibility to do what it should be doing and shutting down the Israeli embassy, because it would be sending a very powerful message. The unfortunate consequence of shutting down the embassy would be that it would have a huge impact on our economy, because you would have investors pull out. You have a very powerful Zionist lobby in this country. I won't use the word Jewish because we are not anti-Jewish, we're anti-Zionist.
Absolutely.
So the Zionist lobby would actually then use all of its muscle power to hurt the local economy, get investors to pull out, whatever it is that they would do. So that would hurt us as South Africa. However, at the end of the day, if we are truly committed to the Palestinian cause, there are difficult decisions that have to be made. And the South African government has to realize that, okay, we're in a very poor situation economically. Our sort of growth rate is very low and poor. We have other challenges, unemployment, etc. So it would really not be ideal for us to have an economic sort of knock-on effect by shutting down the Israeli embassy and so on. But it would be a moral victory at the end of the day. It would be ethically the correct thing to do, because by continuing with the relationship that the South African government is continuing with Israel, it has diplomatic relations, it has economic relations, it has cultural, etc., etc. It needs to actually end all of these relationships in order to truly express solidarity, and of course to make an example, or make because if South American countries can actually cut off relations with Israel, and they are still countries, they haven't collapsed.
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping us from doing that. So we have, as activists, as professionals in every capacity that you can imagine, have implored the South African government to shut the Israeli embassy down. They haven't done it, and they're reluctant to do it. So we have to actually find other ways to convince them. So if the government is not doing what it should be doing, then we as citizens have to use our power that we have, whether it's economic or whatever other form of power that we actually have to, we have entities in this country, like you have the South African Zionist Federation, you have the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, and so on. And one has to find ways to isolate these entities and to basically ensure that they are, as apartheid South Africa was isolated, that these entities are somehow not allowed to have any presence.
Yeah.
Venues should not be giving them space to have their events, things like that, which you basically ensure that they cannot actually function in this country.
So, looking at the Palestinians themselves as a community, what do you think is the best option that they have to find this common platform together for them to find a way to resolve the solution? The situation, because that's what we all want to know. What is the solution now to this entire matter?
Well, you have Palestinians that are spread out across the board. You have the Palestinians in Gaza, and they're unfortunately, being killed at the moment. You you have the Palestinians in the West Bank, then you have an entire Palestinian population in diaspora. Then you have Palestinians that live in Jerusalem, and because the way the Israelis have created these sort of, geographical situations that Palestinians have been divided deliberately, so they can't come together and they cannot actually talk to each other and organize themselves and so on, even though you have the political parties. So I think what will have to happen is that the international community will have to come in and to sort of create a space or assist them to create a space where they can actually talk to each other and decide on what they want. Because, I mean, there are common things that they do believe in, that they want a national sort of identity which unites them, which is, a state for themselves. They want the right of return for those people who went into exile or forced out, and a couple of other things. So at the end of the day, there needs to be a situation that is created that enables them to come together. I mean, if you look at South Africa, for example, we were able, although we were sort of not on the same page on many things, we were still in the same country. We were able to still come and talk to each other. And although we differed along, various lines, there wasn't anyone from outside who was kind of forcing a particular sort of, outcome. We actually had to sit together across the table from each other and talk to each other and resolve it. And even when there were people who wanted their own little homeland, like the Afrikaners wanted their Foxstad, and maybe the Zulu people wanted their little Zulu kingdom or whatever. Nelson Mandela was very clear, and he said, no, it's going to be one state, one country that brings us all together. And so increasingly the one-state solution for the Palestinians is something that has been mooted even by the majority of Palestinians themselves, that we want to live together. And even the people who are Israeli, in terms of nationality, that the one-state solution would be the ideal one for them, that incorporates the Jewish people who live in Israel, the Palestinians who live in Israel at the moment, the Palestinians who live in the West Bank, the Palestinians who live in Jerusalem, the Palestinians who live in Gaza.
Christians, Muslims, Jews.
Everyone living together under one state and, creating a space where everyone can perhaps have their particular, maybe a national sort of, let's call it, accommodate them in certain ways. But it's like one country that brings them together, something like the South African situation.
Right.
And although we can't impose, a solution, if you have to look at it practically, that would seem the most practical outcome.
So not like a two-state solution, which is what some countries are agreeing on.
The geography on the ground does not permit a two-state solution because of the settlements that have emerged, because of all of the other dynamics that exist there. There's all these Bantustans and all of the layout of the land does not permit a two-state solution because Israel has increasingly encroached on the territory, occupied and stolen even more land. So there's really nothing left for the Palestinians to have their state. It actually has to all be dismantled completely and have one territory that allows everyone to coexist.
And South Africa is the perfect example of that.
It would be
not be this real true rainbow nation. Racism still exists in many places.
Yeah, it would be the closest to what could happen, because we had our own Bantustans. We had the TBVC Bantustans, which we dismantled. People came together. We created new provinces. And while we still have our challenges, at least we have one country.
Yeah. I think, every episode I say we needed part 2. So, to end this on my side, there's not a moment that goes by in my life that I do not cry for the people of Palestine, and especially in Gaza right now. And there's ways that us, Shane and I, being part of Penny Appeal South Africa, we are truly able to assist, and we've had already assisted people in the ground through our networks and partners that we've been working with there. And that's one way that we can help, by using, as the Prophet ﷺ has said in these times, that you use that wealth in the name of Islam and to help those people, whoever they are, wherever they are. So this is a time that we can use our wealth and whatever it is, you know, there's so many Sahaba have for this kind of struggle. They gave the entire wealth. Some gave half. Some gave some. So whatever it is, we can do that. Our du'as are there constantly for the people and for anywhere that there's suffering and there's oppression. And you know, that's all I can say right now, and that's why we're having this podcast, that to share the information, to enlighten others. And maybe someone watching this have not known the history and the reality. This could be something that could change that perspective, and inshallah they become the leaders who to use their platform and share this, so many others can really truly benefit from it. So thank you, Lubna, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much. It was very, very enlightening. And you're right, we do need part 2.
No, thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to share my thoughts, and I pray and hope that we see a free and liberated Palestine in our lifetime, inshallah.
Ameen.
Inshallah. Good.
So thank you everyone once again, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Mindscaped podcast. Peace out.